We will call the Utilities Committee to order. Please stand and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Will do. Alderman Redpath.
Here.
Alderman Senor. Alderman Turner.
Here.
Alderman Fulgenci.
Here.
Alderman Proctor.
Here.
Alderman DeCenso.
Present.
Alderman McMiniman.
Here.
Alderman Tylen.
Here.
Alderman Donlin.
Here.
Alderman Hanauer.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, the quorum is present.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the March 19th, 2018 Public Utilities Committee minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the ayes have it. We'll now move to presentations. The first part of the presentation from the utility is going to be the financial report. Director, you're on.
Okay, this is going to be the fourth quarter results, but they're not the audited results. Those will be audited basically at the end of June. So the electric fund had $24.1 million on hand. That's 44 days of cash per our calculation. With Moody's, though, that's up to 70 days because they include the restricted fund of the environmental rebate initiative, or the environmental regulatory initiative and rebate fund. So our fund, for our cash by month is shown here for the last 3 fiscals. And that's per our calculation, not the Moody's, just to be clear on that. The electric fund revenues for retail are down. Again, with, I've said this before, but with mild springs and summers, you can see that our revenues are not hitting their marks. The wholesale sales are down, and that's really because of the market. Another way to look at our revenues, and you'll see that with some other graphs that we have here for other revenues and expenses going forward. But basically, we're taking the last 2 fiscals and comparing it to last fiscal's budget. So our expenses to date are down. And part of this is also because, with our revenues being lower because our units are running less, that means that we're using less fuel for that as well. So that would also affect our expenses.
So then, with the next slide, your expenses are down 27, with the sales down 18. That's a net 9 million gain, right?
Essentially, yes. Then our expenses here for comparison over the last 2 fiscals compared to budget. Our debt coverage ratio is 2.06, and then if you include basically the corporate payments, then we're down to 1.83, and that is what the rating agencies look at, so that's why we show both. And then here you can see basically our pilot payments over the last 3 fiscals, or the debt coverage with our pilot payments included. So the electric fund overall is still, headed in the right direction moving forward. The water, we got the cash on hand of $6 million, so that's 90 days of cash. And here you can see the cash by month for the last 3 fiscals. How basically it is starting to decline for our cash on hand. Water revenues are basically even with our budget, where expenses are under budget. So water's doing well controlling expenses. Revenue for comparison, again, for the last 2 fiscals compared to budget. And here you can kind of see basically how weather again affects our revenues, especially when we have a cool, wet summer. For expenses, they're down also compared to the budget. Debt coverage ratio is 1.75, and then with the auxiliary services, it's 1.54, and that's what the rating agencies look at for water. Our labor costs are under budget right now for the water fund and the electric fund. Questions? That's all.
Even after all the noise that was made about the overtime out at CWLP, you guys are still under budget on both electric and water.
Correct.
And part of the reason why we never saw a additional ordinance for additional funding is because with the positions that were being covered by the overtime, you were still under budget in all of the 1200 series, so you did not need additional appropriation even with the overtime. You were still under the budgeted amount, and that's one of the things I've been trying to explain to my constituents, that the overtime was only caused because we had a lack of people who were filling the positions, but the overtime was still less than what we would have paid hiring in people to cover.
That's correct.
So I just want to make that point to everyone that, you know, the story about the overtime and everything else, it was not, that was Chicken Little running around. That was not the sky is falling. We were still under budget.
Mr. Chair. Doug, good report. You got through this in 5 minutes. We need Finance Director, Budget Director Bill McCarty to take a good example on this. I mean, you went through the dashboard and hit the key numbers, and that's really an efficient report. As to what Alderman Tylen is talking about with that overtime issue, that was not so much a financial issue. That was a human resource management issue that involved not just CWLP, but our posting and hiring procedures outside of CWLP. But getting back to the report, Doug, I think we've asked that we get a summary of what's happening to our environmental fund, that you include that on the quarterly reports. Is that included on here, that's showing how our environmental surplus fund that is derived from the reduction in the coal prices, the coal contract, is that?
It was a small note on the electric slide right here. The EIRF fund is $14.3 million right now.
Could you show that as a bar graph showing how it's growing for the future quarterly reports, you know, from its inception, which was, I believe, 3 years ago, roughly?
Yeah. I don't know if it'll get you as much, but yeah, we can do that.
I think
Because it's basically growing about $3.5 million a year, 3.2, I think. Is that right, Chris? About 3.2?
Through May, the balance that we've deposited in that account's right at $6 million. So through May, it's $15 million in there right now, and we go $250,000 to $300,000 monthly deposits into that account, depending on
usage.
On usage, right?
Okay.
The number up there was through February. So current balance is $15 million.
And it did take that big jump because of the wind contract settlement that we had last year, where we deposited $9 million into this account.
Okay. So what slide is that? I'm having trouble. Okay. There we go. Okay. Are there any other? I found it. Are there any other funds, Doug, that capital spending type funds that are worthy of tracking, that shows an accumulation of funds?
Yeah, we don't have a fund that's actually going to be growing like this with any money coming into it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Alderman Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick request, Director. That second slide again, if you could provide to us, like over the last 3 or 4 years, the trend with those numbers. In other words, I'd like to see when we came into office in May of 2015, what the numbers look like, and then every year thereafter.
For the EIRF?
No, for just that entire slide, all of the numbers on that page. Of course, the EIRF wasn't around back then, but you know, the electric fund, working cash on hand, how many days? I'd like to just see the trend.
Would it be some? I mean, we do have
Is it? Yeah, but it's hard to read.
that one. You want something a little bit different? Okay.
Yeah, just with the actual numbers and in that same format, it'd just be helpful.
Sure. I got you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good report.
Any other questions? Director, I have a question for you. The first wind contract fell off. What impact will that have? That's obviously we're not paying out the losses that we've been paying out over the years. So how much will that impact us, our fund now?
Well, it is a pass-through with our ratepayers. So the ratepayers will see, the difference with that falling off. I don't actually have a number in front of me, though.
Is there a way to calculate those numbers?
Well, can we show that?
We'd have to project what we would have bought. I mean, we can use historical data and say what we bought through that wind contract.
Just give us an idea how that's going to work and how much it's going to be passed, how much it's going to save the ratepayers.
Sure.
Thank you. Anything else for the director on this? Then we'll move to the second presentation, which is the IRP, and you can start.
And before I turn it over to Micah to run through the presentation, I kind of want to talk about the process just kind of at a higher level. Just a couple of points I want to make. First, it's going to be transparent. Everybody's going to have access to the results for this study. And to further transparency, we're not picking winners and losers. We're not going to, no one's going to be directing the outcome of the study. So what we're going to get is basically a portfolio of options, and T will come to the City Council and present those options or those results. And that's truly when the discussion is going to begin on what that future energy mix should be, knowing what those costs might be, what are our options. And that's where I think it's going to be a little bit more lengthy on making those decisions, allowing time for everybody to understand what's going on and moving forward. And we'll also provide updates at the future quarterly meetings as well. So I will turn it over to Micah and then go from there.
Before we get started, I want to let the audience know that there will be a portion that people can talk to the committee. We've also put comment forms up here on this table. If you don't want to come up and speak, you're welcome to put a comment on there and put it in the box. And Amber, they'll be able to we'll get back to them on the comment cards. Is that how that's going to work?
Yeah, they're submitting them.
So if for those of you who don't want to say something, you're welcome to fill out a comment card, put it in the box, and we'll take those under consideration. And when we get to that part, we have a couple speakers. So go ahead, Micah.
What is an integrated resource plan? And why does CWLP need an integrated resource plan at this time? What goes into it? What does the process look like? What comes out of it? My name is Micah Bushnell. I'm the Director of Planning and Markets for CWLP. And if you want to know the answers to those questions, you've come to the right place today. So, on the screen is a technical definition of what an integrated resource plan is. I implore you not to read that. So instead, what an IRP really is you first have to start by projecting what your customers' energy and demand consumption needs are going to be in the future. And then it's a straightforward process that you go through in order to satisfy those needs. So you can either satisfy it with generation resources, perhaps T&D infrastructure upgrades, or perhaps you can invest in some lower cost energy saving or demand reduction techniques and encourage your customers to use less so we don't have to invest in these very expensive generation resources. So what do we get from TEA? Well, according to TEA, the most important thing is we get a least cost, high reliability plan, and it comes with an action plan at the end. So in order to tell our story, we have to go back in time about 43 years to 1975. And for 30 years, up to 2005, projecting CWLP's energy consumption was Relatively simple. In fact, it was so simple you could draw a straight line and just look out 10 or 20 years. So when our energy planners determined that we would not have enough energy generation in our fleet to cover demand for the next 10 or 20 years, we decided to build Dahlman 4. And in 2006, things changed. Energy consumption flattened off, and now it's negative. So we've actually missed that projection from a decade and a half ago by about 25%. This didn't just happen to us. This happened everywhere in the U.S. The same can be said for our peak demand, that while there's a little more volatility, the straight line method was pretty simple and true. And a coal-fired power plant was an excellent way to satisfy both your energy and your peak demand needs. So Unit 4 was a great investment. But the same thing happened with our peak demand, and we've missed our projection by 23% since then. At that time, that wasn't really that bad of news because on-peak power prices were about $65, and now we have units that can produce energy for about half to a third of that. And had those peak prices continued, the presentation Doug just gave, well, he might have looked a lot more like that. But instead, that didn't happen. Peak power prices dropped. The shale revolution did occur, and fracking is a thing today. And power prices have been sustained at about $39 for the last decade. So, with unprecedented load decline, and we're facing some capital expenditures to comply with environmental regulations for our coal-fired power plants, we're asking ourselves, is it worth it? In today's environment of low energy and capacity prices, especially considering the decreasing costs of gas, wind, and solar. So what's the process to do an IRP? Well, you first, like I said, you have to start with a load forecast. So TEA is going to first start by producing a 20-year econometric load forecast for both energy and demand. And then it gets really technical. You start with a software product called ProMod. This is an industry standard. And you feed into it a bunch of assumptions and inputs. Yet it's a market-wide simulation. You have to vary the gas price, load levels. You have to make assumptions about what the world is going to look like. And out of that, you get price streams. What are the prices projected to be in the market, given those assumptions? So we will do 9 different scenarios where we vary those things on the left, and we will project forward 20 years. So we'll have 20 years of power prices for 9 different scenarios. Once we get those power prices, TEA will shift over to another software product called capacity expansion. You feed into that our plant costs, fixed, variable, CapEx, capital expenditures that we expect to make, and the prices that we forecast in the previous step gets fed in, the load forecast that TEA is expecting, and any transmission costs that are associated with plant retirements or additions. So you give it all of these inputs, and then you give the model options. You give it the option to retire plants or add new plants like gas, wind, solar, or even battery storage or some demand-side management. And out of that model, you will get an optimal portfolio. You will get a second optimal portfolio, a third and a fourth, et cetera. And you get this for all 9 of our scenarios. So once we get those outputs, those portfolio options, TEA will come to this very podium and present the results, at which point it's up to us to create an action plan and to execute that plan. So Let's back up and talk about the two things that CWLP really has control over in this process. We need to make assumptions about what market scenarios to give the model, and we need to give it decisions to make. So what kind of portfolio options, what kind of retirements or plant additions should you give it an option to make? So if you back up a few slides to the previous slide, those market scenarios are what is on the left. We have to have a base case on what you expect gas prices to be, where you expect load levels to be, and all of these expectations for all of these bullet points. And then you start varying them for different contingencies or different conditions. So MISO has a well-vetted process that they use for planning. They call it MTEP. It stands for MISO Transmission Expansion Plan. There are literally dozens of planning engineers that work on this model. They use it to make billions of dollars of transmission investments. It's a public model. If you have the rights, we're going to take this model and use it. Not only that, but we're going to take the 4 cases that MISO uses, the 4 scenarios, and we're going to use those. So just a bit about the scenarios. For our base case, we're going to use MISO's MTEP, continued fleet change, they call it. And what that means is today, coal plants and nuclear plants are retiring, and they're being replaced with gas, wind and solar, and some other products. This is happening at an expected rate. So the base case is if we expect this to continue at an expected rate. Then they run another scenario in which things tend to slow down, where coal and nuclear units retire more slowly, and they're replaced at a slower rate with gas, wind, and solar, and other. They have a third case, which is the opposite of that. It's accelerated. If technological advancements or different economics occur, you can expect coal and nuclear plants to retire more quickly. And there's a fourth scenario in which is a little different. They run a scenario where there's a high technology adoption, where renewables hit the market, distributed solar, distributed generation, electric vehicles, and all kinds of other technologies hit the market faster than expected. So those four scenarios are decided already. We get 9. There are some other scenarios that we've kicked around, such as what happens if carbon regulation is less than we expect? What happens if it's stricter and other environmental regulations are stricter? What happens if renewables enter at a much more accelerated rate? What happens if our load just doesn't show up like TEA projected? Or what happens if temperatures get more extreme in the winter and summer? Or what happens when our coal price is higher than we expect? So these 6 scenarios are ideas that we've kicked around so far. We still have yet to decide on all of these. So now that we've discussed market scenarios, the other option, the other thing that we have control over is the portfolio options. Obviously, wind, solar, and gas make it into the conversation. Now, this graphic will show you in just kind of general terms the economics of each on a per megawatt hour basis. Wind power purchase agreements today are the most economic means of getting renewable energy into your portfolio. Power purchase agreements for solar are more economic. Both power purchase agreements in wind and solar are more economic than us building and owning our own. We cannot capitalize on the tax incentives that other folks can. When you're talking about natural gas, there's a trade-off. The more efficient natural gas units you get, it makes the dollars per megawatt cheaper, but the investment cost goes up significantly. So the outcome of what kind of gas units are identified is a balance of what your energy and demand needs are. There are other feasible portfolio options such as battery storage, and as I mentioned earlier, some demand side projects where if we can have some lower cost programs to help our customers lower their demand and energy use, then like I said, we don't need to invest in very expensive generation fleet. And then there's, of course, the option to just purchase energy and capacity off of the market for long term. Some other questionable portfolio, and I use the word questionable, but I use it kind of like, my kids use questionable judgment. These are really more poor scenarios, but biomass, burning things like corn and wood, landfill gas, burning the methane that comes off of landfill, fuel cells, hydroelectric, and even coal are still within the conversation at this point. Some things that are already really ruled out, we're too small to build a nuclear facility. Offshore wind doesn't exist for thousands of miles, and Illinois doesn't have the solar profile to really support solar thermal, not to be confused with photovoltaic solar. So, in a nutshell, what we do is we give the model a bunch of market scenarios. We give it options to retire units or to build new units or to make decisions. And then we get out of that a bunch of portfolio options for each scenario. So until June 28th, we'll be taking comments. And there's an email address. It should be in the handouts, and it's in the slide presentation up there. And after that, our work is mostly fixed. It becomes a big black box at that point. The decisions on our side have been made. The process takes a long time to compute after that. And then, months later, we get portfolio results.
So the comments, is that the form, or is there other means that they can comment people can comment?
They can comment through that email address, and that should get channeled to the right people. I don't know what that form is. Forms? Okay.
That's in the forms up here? Thank you.
Thanks, Vanna.
Any questions, Alderman Hanauer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions I have is, okay, you say you're going to provide information on the fixed and variable cost and things like that.
Yeah, that's a staple, and if they don't understand that,
is that definitely something we're going to be able to get? Because
yes.
It's taken us 3 years to get that from.
And it's going to be a while longer, definitely. It's, I think Doug said it plenty of times, our accounting system was set up to own the units, in which case you only needed to know your variable costs. So once prices went above that, you could generate and make money, and when they went below it, you could turn them off. It was never set up to envision whether or not we would need to know whether we invest in them or not. So we're working on it. There's about 3 years of data we're trying to compile for TEA. That's not part of the thing that they need at this time. We can get that to them a little later. And it's a good thing because it's going to be a little bit. There are 210,000 line items that we have to go through and sort by unit.
Okay, the other part of this, and I brought it up before, is the concern that I have that if once we start shutting down 31, 32, perhaps 33, 4 is going to be here a while. We got to pay for that. We got quite a bit of money left to pay in that. Potential of maybe losing our coal mine. That leaves us one person or one company in the area, which they could set the price. Are we doing anything as part of this to look at either having a railroad spike or someplace where we can get coal from out of the region, say Western Region coal or something like that? Because we got to have, and I mean this is important for the future, we've got to have an alternative, or you're going to see $75, $50, $75 easy a ton coal. And I don't want to see, the the coal mine out north shut down, but if we're not using that much coal, it's going to put them in a bind, I would think. So, I mean, I just think we got to look at that along with this. That's something separate from the IRP, but it's something that needs to be addressed. And, you know, having it go to Decatur and all that, I don't see. It's something we've got to really look at. I don't think Decatur, because the trucking prices will kill us.
Yeah, I mean, as far as part of even the contract that we have for our coal contract, that's some work that we're going to have to do and looking at our options. And by no means, you know, do we want to have to worry about having only one source of supply in the area. But it is a real issue to consider. But what we can do for the IRP process is, you know, put in a higher number for coal. On the chance that if we shut down on 31, 32, and 33, and we're operating only Unit 4, what would that do to us? But I mean, that could indicate that maybe that's too expensive to operate, too, as well. So we got to be careful on what kind of price tag we put on that. You know, building rail spurs and that kind of stuff like that is definitely an expensive option. Burning Western coal is not probably likely, just because of the amount of capital expenditure that we'd have to put into those plants to actually burn it. Because we can't risk fires and explosions. So there's major modifications that have to be done that'll burn that fine powdered coal from Western coal. So, but that's kind of nutshell, kind of, I think, addresses the coal concerns as well. And we'll do, you know, the first thing up maybe is to do a market study later this fall on coal.
Well, I see Bob Gardner out in the audience from Arch, and I'm not wishing you ill will here, Bob. I'm looking at all the scenarios, so I wanted to make sure we brought that up.
Alderman Donlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My two questions are related to the IRP. I just want to make sure I understand what you're hoping, on one of the questions, what you're hoping to, what kind of public input do you want? In other words, what's the message you would like us as aldermen and women to put out there to our constituents? What do you want from them? What are they supposed to comment on? They said the comments are being accepted till the end of June. Yep. But, you know, I have to put the word out, and absolutely, if you could help me with that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Well, we only have control over two of the things. What are the market scenarios? And that is perhaps beyond the comprehension of, or not the comprehension, but the knowledge of a lot of people. You really have to make assumptions about what the future is going to be on natural gas prices, load levels, things like that. And those are even difficult for us industry professionals.
Right.
We do welcome anyone suggesting market scenarios. So a high coal price is one of the market scenarios we're kicking around, which I believe does somewhat address Alderman Hanauer's concern, where we will get a scenario back in which it will look exactly as though it would if we had a high coal price. But the other thing, too, is what decision should we give it? You know, we are mostly committed to giving it the decision to retire all 4 coal units. But the technologies and whatever people would like to see in portfolio additions or other ideas.
I haven't looked at your website in the last few days. Is there something on the website that we can point people to that basically explains what's going on and what you're looking for from the general public? As you said, some of this is extremely technical and the average person won't be able to comment on. That's why we hire experts. But
you're right.
But I mean, what I'm getting at is I don't want to be accused down the line of, well, we offered a period for the public to comment and we never explain what we're wanting from the public.
I don't know that we have this.
And if you don't have anything yet, if you could just give that some thought, because I think it would be helpful for the citizens to know what this plan is all about and how they can participate.
Yeah, we'll definitely be doing more, like another media release. We'll put it on social media again, you know, to try to encourage comments on this. We'll try to come up with some way to kind of highlight these items here. We didn't really want to release it ahead of time, so we wanted to kind of give a chance to run it by you guys first. But then, if somebody has another idea here, on a different type of scenario, what kind of environmental regulations, I think we're addressing most of the items here that are relevant to the industry. So I think we've got a lot of that stuff covered. But if there's something that we're missing, that we can look at addressing. We're not going to run 30 scenarios, that's for sure. We don't have that kind of money for that. But
We get 9.
but we'll definitely,
What would be something?
pick the optimal ones.
What would be something that's not listed that an average citizen in the IRP process would bring up, as an example?
Can you switch your coal units to natural gas?
Or can I switch to solar solely?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not in there for a reason. It's very expensive, but
Understand, but
that's not in here. Someone may have.
I just want to be clear that, I'd really like to put something out that encourages people to comment, but I just need some direction, that's all. If you guys could get that some thoughts. And then my second question is, the mayor referenced, before we started this process, a couple of times, a study that the Chamber of Commerce did that analyzed CWLP and cost of power, and then I believe the Sierra Club had a presentation at the Citizens Club, and there was a couple newspaper articles. Will those reports, will T be looking at those reports and seeing, checking them for validity, or seeing how it fits into this new plan? In other words, we have some things out there that I really don't know. Are they accurate or are they not? I'm not an expert in power. However, I think it would be helpful for someone who is an expert, and we hire like T, to at least, one, be aware, and two, maybe take a closer look at them.
Well, I think what T's doing is they're looking at each individual unit. Like a study like that, from what I understand, is if you're looking at the overall cost of generation, that's just a blunt instrument look at that. But what T's doing is they're looking at each individual unit to determine when they should be retired, at what point. So for them to go and look at other reports and try to comment on that, that's not what they're here for, for that process. They will be looking at the same exact information. It's just going to be broken down at a much lower level, because it's going to be per unit. So it's easy to aggregate everything to their overall picture to see how much money that the generation might have lost in a given year. But we don't, again, going back to the cost of the units, when you're not just the incremental costs, but the actual fixed and variable costs total, that's a different picture than trying to get it aligned per unit.
I understand, but what I guess I'm getting at is, since I have your answer now, I want us to avoid, okay, the report is done, and then we have someone saying, well, this report has these numbers, the Chamber's report has these numbers, and then the numbers from T are different, and this group says it costs more than this group, and how do we get something that we are comfortable with as a council, and that we can present to the citizens that is indeed, I'll just say it very bluntly, accurate, and that we can rely on?
Well, again, so with looking at an aggregate form, we can comment to that once we get the T results from that, if there's something that's a little bit different. But my assumption, or my gut feel, is that it's going to lay out a plan for retirement of those units. So I think that some of those issues will be addressed in the results that T is going to provide.
Well, I'd just like you to give that some thought, because I don't want us all to be in a trick bag at the end and say, oh, we didn't even look at this and we didn't take into consideration. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. I don't know, but it would be helpful, I think, for us all to at least
until we have the
admit
numbers.
what's out there and take a look.
They might be the same numbers. We don't know yet.
Absolutely.
So we have to wait and see.
Right.
And essentially, in the aggregate, they're going to be close. It's a matter of breaking it down, the aggregate down to per unit. And it's some of it is a judgment call on some of the line items, and that's why it takes so long. Is there's so many, there's over 200,000 line items, and it takes a long time to go and assign that. you know, what the makeup is for that. So once we decide on that 3 years of data, then we'll have a good comfort feel on how that's broken down, but it's not going to change the aggregate on the outlook. Which anybody can look at our financial picture and look at the audited numbers and see what's going on.
I hear what you're saying. Thank you.
Alderman Senso.
Thank you. Alderman Donlin took most of my question, but
Sorry.
that's all right.
It was on purpose.
I don't have much of a voice anyway, so. But I just want to be sure, I want to be clear that this is the public involvement component of the IRP, is this email address and these comment forms. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we'll do more than that eventually. I mean, like I said, we'll address at the future quarterly meetings as well, trying to provide updates where we're at. And if there's information that we can share at that time, we will. But yeah, that's, I mean, to go further than that will delay the IRP process significantly. And that's something we don't want to do. We have other issues that we need to deal with and making decisions with those units, with the capital investments, and we need to have that information really now. So we're already kind of behind the 8 ball already. Right, and at the end, again, we'll have that, you know, the portfolio options presented, and it gives you the optimal, the least cost first, and then it's going to give you multiple other ones. So we're going to have a big bag, basically, to pull out of for options, or how we want to fulfill that future need. And then it's going to come down to cost. You know, what is that going to mean to our customers?
I just want to make sure we get the word out there that this is how the public can participate.
Alderman Tylen.
I don't necessarily think that this is a scenario in and of itself, but maybe the idea of changing environment. I've had several people ask me over the years of how would a drought condition, at what point would a drought actually impact the electric plant? Because you need water in the production of the electricity in our current plants. So at what point with a water shortage would we start being impacted at the electric plant, and would environmental impact like that be a possible scenario?
We're actually constrained today by such a scenario. The units are temperature limited on their output. So they can't exceed 109 degrees Fahrenheit at all, and we can only exceed 99 degrees Fahrenheit for so many hours a year. So there are conditions today where we actually, when it doesn't rain enough and the water in the lake gets too hot, we have to curtail the load on those units. A drought would only exacerbate that problem.
Alderman Fulgenzi.
Yes, I don't understand a lot about the accounting procedures, but you mentioned you had to go to 210,000 line items.
Yes.
And we're not set up to do the accounting the way it should be done. Are we putting those line items into a computer or accounting scenario so that we can recall some of that stuff at a future date on a moment's notice, or how are we doing this?
So we're doing our best to categorize them using database techniques, but an example of what we've done in the past, why it's hard to sort it out by unit, is when you have guys that go and work on a boiler in Unit 3, they come back and they write down boiler work, and that's how it gets stuck in our accounting system. What unit did they work on the boiler? Well, you have to go deep in the descriptions to try to categorize where that was. And when you're going back years, it's a time-consuming process. So to overhaul our accounting system from the way we do it today, to start categorizing them by unit is a very expensive effort all by itself. So it's best to try to do it this one time rather than completely overhaul units that may or may not have a life expectancy.
When you say it's best to do it this time to overhaul them, are you trying to categorize them this time by unit? Is that it?
Yeah,
So
we're doing our
down
best. Absolutely. We're doing our best to do 3 years worth of financial data to get them categorized by unit. Okay. That's the only way TEA can really move forward effectively.
We actually
as we're doing it, we're trying to put some simple systems in place. So in the future, we have it categorized better.
Thank you.
Alderman Hanauer, do you have another question? No. Alderman McMiniman.
A real easy question first on, just to clarify the acronym used on slide 11 and 12, the ABB acronym, what was that?
ABB is a vendor, like CWLP. It's just a company. Sorry.
Okay. And then the ProMob, right below that acronym?
Yeah, ProMod is so ABB is the company, ProMod is the software tool.
Okay. Secondly, thank you, Alderman Hanauer, for mentioning that Mr. Bob Gardner of Arch Coal is here today. I have never met Mr. Bob Gardner. Could he identify himself? Thank you, Mr. Gardner, for being here today from Arch Coal of Elkhart Mine. Lastly, I wasn't intending to bring this up, but regarding the lake heat, the temperature of the lake, as I understand it, we discharge the heated water in the vicinity of the generation plant. And have you discussed, piping that water out to a very distant location up lake or to the south to try to mitigate the heat issue?
Yeah, we've looked at many options over the years on how to extend that little peninsula point, I guess, or actually the problem with putting the pipe in is just then the back pressure back, because that's all gravity fed. From once it leaves the condensers, it just flows. It's not pumped anymore. And to try to push it out that far in the lake, it just wouldn't flow. That's why it's discharged right at the shore, if you will. Yeah, we looked at, where do we really need to take the temperature? What else can we do? Can we put a longer? That's why we always said if we could extend I call it the point, but around the south side of the plant, the island extended out about another 1,000 feet. So there's a longer, more circular path that water has to take. But we've never been able to come up with a plan that really would work for it.
But isn't the intake and the discharge on different sides of the island?
Correct, but what happens there, the way it works is it just flows right along the shoreline and goes right back into the intake. Now, when we had Lakeside operating, it was even worse because that was closer to the Dahlman intake, and it would have come right back into the Dahlman intake. But we've looked at many options over the last 30 years that I've been involved on how we can do that.
All right, and lastly, as far as the comment that Alderman DeCenso raised about public participation, I think what we were hearing you also say then is that once the options and the portfolio options are presented from the TEA folks, then that will give rise to very significant potential public participation, and there'll be cost issues to consider and so forth.
Yeah, this is only the beginning steps, obviously. So the whole idea of this presentation today was to, educate all of us on how this whole process is going to work. So it's a long process. We're welcoming public input, and hopefully we'll get through that. Any other questions from the council? If not, we're going to move. I'm going to jump out of order, and we're going to go to citizens' request to address the committee because we have some speakers. We have one speaker, correct?
One speaker signed up.
Jane McBride, I believe, is the speaker. And Ms. McBride, you sent us a list of questions this afternoon is when we got them. So I don't think we're going to be able to address those tonight, but you can still please address the committee about your concerns, and we'll get back. We'll take these under consideration if that's okay with you.
That would be great. I appreciate it. Just listening to this, I just wanted to be clear on the public participation portion, and I appreciate understanding more that this comment period is the public participation, the initial public participation. So let's say in that slide that was just up, those are your options that you can go from. TEA's going to plug in a certain number of them, and then these are your options. So if I wanted, or my comment, my preference is for there be as much analysis of demand side as possible. That's an appropriate comment at this point? Is that the kind of thing that you're looking for? Or if I want as much renewable use, I want minimized carbon, that's the kind of thing you're looking for. All right, I do think it would be extremely helpful if that is publicized to the public, so they understand that this is their opportunity to comment on how they want their energy generated and the like.
We're going to listen to all the comments.
Right.
Okay.
That'd be wonderful. To be honest with you, this is all I've got. I hope I'm not the only public speaker here, but I'm probably the only one that figured out the system that was applied to this one. But for this right now, I think that's all I've really got. I want to make sure I understood that. Okay. Thank you.
I think we have to be, no, that's okay.
Okay.
No, I just think we have to be very careful when, I understand that everybody wants to get the information out, but I think we have to be very careful when we start listing, these are the types of public comments we're looking for. I think that everybody has to really generate those comments related to what their interests are and what they're interested in seeing. So, I mean, I guess it's okay to do some suggestive, but I just don't want to get people confused. And if we start listing things, then that may give the public the idea these are the only things that we're interested in. So I just think that when you start posting things on the website, you have to be very careful. You just have to be very careful and not let people think that they're limited in the types of comments that you're looking for.
I agree, Doris.
Yeah,
Don't narrow the road.
Yeah, because you can't really say. I mean, I understand what you were getting at, Alderman Donelan and Alderman DeCenso, but I just fear that we're going to send a wrong message that these are the only things that we're interested in.
Yeah, you don't want to lead them. You just want them to know the questions.
Yeah, something could come out of left field from somebody that's great that nobody's really thought of.
Exactly. So I just think we have to be careful.
You done?
Yeah.
Any other comments from the council? Anyone else want to address the committee? Step up. Please state your name for the committee. Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Steve Stewart. I live in Ward 9. I'm retired and don't represent anybody but myself.
Okay.
I just want to encourage the decision makers, the council, to recognize that small, incremental, steady increases in costs are pretty much expected. It's the big shocks that's going to hurt somebody on a fixed income, that's going to hurt businesses that we're trying to keep in Springfield. 3 of my 4 kids live in Springfield. 6 of my 8 grandkids live here. I'd like to have them stay. So the incremental costs, you can dwell with this. The big changes that are difficult. For example, you saw the graph on demand. You straight line it and it goes up forever. But things happen. Not always good things. The same thing with energy prices. The shale came in, gas got cheap. Boom, it changed everything. Well, we live in a pretty volatile world and things can change. Sometimes to your advantage, sometimes to your disadvantage. Perish the thought that there's an accident at a nuclear plant. It has an accident, somebody examines it and says all the nuclear plants are vulnerable to this, shut them down. That changes the supply dramatically. I think we ought to keep a mixture of sources. Some wind, not at an exorbitant price, but at a fair price. Keep some wind in the energy portfolio. There's solar. I live a couple blocks from Crawford Murphy and Tilly on West Washington. The solar panels that they've got, they're pretty proud of that. A friend of mine told me that their electric bills have gone way down. That's good for everybody, but who knows what's going to happen? Is NAFTA going to go up or down? Are there going to be tariffs? Or is there going to be increased trade? The economy's going great. Keep enough coal generation that if there's a big shock and purchase price of electricity goes way up, that we can generate enough to take care of ourselves maybe sell some extra, but don't get rid of enough of too much coal generation and put us vulnerable to the big jump. We can take a little gradual price increase as things go up. Everybody's pretty used to that. But don't get rid of the protection of having our own generation that's going to protect us from something big that we can't project. Because you just saw the graphs, things do happen that are sometimes good, more often than not bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, Beverly Bunch, Ward 6. I really liked the PowerPoint presentation. That was very nicely done. I guess I have concerns about the plan. I hear a lot about finances, and like the gentleman before, we all are concerned about rates. I also, when he mentions his kids, the biggest thing I worry about my kids is health and the environment. So I guess one of my issues is to what extent are those addressed, and are they actually quantified in the analysis that will do the ranking? And if not, I hope that'll be taken into account. Also, I guess we keep hearing about Dahlman 4 and the outstanding debt. I guess it would be helpful for me as a member of the public to know, what does that mean? Does that mean we have to keep Dahlman 4 running to pay that debt? Or if we had other revenue options that could be used to pay the debt service, would that be sufficient? And in general, I think helping educate the public is useful, like many of you, but probably 10 times fold. This is very hard to understand, and I rely a lot on the Sierra Club for information, but I want to rely on my city council too. I want you guys to bring the experts to us, and that I get to hear public health experts and environmental experts in addition to the Sierra Club. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Andy Knott with the Sierra Club. And I just want to thank this committee, the council, and CWLP for having this presentation today and taking public input and having it go until June 28th. I think that's very helpful. I also really appreciated the PowerPoint presentation. I thought it was a very, very good overview of what an IRP is. I guess we submitted some comments, I think, on Thursday and questions. And some of those have been addressed in the PowerPoint, so I won't go over those, and we'll just expect maybe to hear back in terms of the comment period. But I might put a finer point on a few of them. I think that, and these are somewhat new. I think in terms of the spirit of transparency, I think it would be helpful if the data and the data sets that the Energy Authority uses become public, so that we can all take a look at them. There was a comment earlier about comparing the Energy Authority's data with these other studies. I think it would be very helpful if, and obviously in the spirit of transparency, to have that and the methodology become transparent as the process unfolds. I think it would also be helpful if the City Council had a representative. There are lots of consultants out there in the world who could be available to help City Council as a liaison between the Energy Authority and this process. I think getting back to a comment made earlier about the Sierra Club study from September of last year versus the Energy Authority study. I mean, I would remind folks that our study did look at each unit, and so it would be helpful, again, to be able to, when this process gets farther along, to compare the different studies. I don't know anything about the chamber study that was mentioned. The other thing that I would just mention is that something that really should be modeled, and we'll put this in our comments, is that the Illinois Future Energy Jobs Act that was passed by the legislature last year will result in a massive increase in wind and solar in Illinois, as well as more energy efficiency. That act will bring by 2030 1,300 megawatts of new wind. That's a 33% increase. And 3,000 megawatts of new solar. That's a 5,000% increase. So we know that around us in Illinois, these newer, cleaner energy sources are coming online, so that should be factored into the modeling. I think that's the last thing. I would agree that we don't want this delayed. I think that the IRP is off to a good start, and we would agree that basically we think that this should happen in 6 months. I mean, the contract with T only has one deadline in it, and that says that the preliminary results are due within 6 months of the contract signing. In our opinion, the report should be done in 6 months from the contract signing, because these are really important decisions that you all are going to be facing, and we feel that they should be done in a timely fashion. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Alderman Hanna.
Thank you. I do agree that, I agree with Alderman Donilon, and I think, and Doug, I do think that the studies, if we have them or if we can get them, ought to be presented to T. I know we don't want them to take the time, but they need to know what's out there, because I'm like, I don't think any of us want to have this report come in and then we have 10 different groups screaming that their numbers are better than ours or whatever. That does have a tendency to worry me a little bit. I don't know that it hurts anything to get the studies and give them to T and let them look at them to see where their numbers are compared to ours. I don't know that necessarily is a problem. We can at least try it. Now, as far as the 6 months, I got to tell you, I don't care if it takes a year, as long as it's done correctly. I don't want to rush through this. You know, this is supposed to be the 15 or 20-year plan. You know, I know people have agendas and they want things closed quicker and all that. That's fine, but we need to make sure that this is done correctly. And if it takes a year to get it done, it takes a year to get it done. But it should be done right the first time. And that way we don't have people saying we didn't do it correctly and it was invalid and whatever. That's what I'm trying to get away from, is that I want to make sure they have all the data that's been thrown out there, and if it's not valid, then that's something we'll have to deal with, or if it is valid, or and they can look at that as well. But I do think, in fairness to these other groups, those reports ought to at least be given to T to reference, to see if it's.
Well, I guess in fairness to the other groups, I mean, those groups are, I mean, maybe with the chamber, we weren't really consulted with that at all, nor we provided a formal copy of it as well. So, it's kind of hard to comment on something like that. But
Doug, what's it hurt?
Well, again, we've never been provided a formal copy of that report. Okay. For the chamber.
That I was not aware of.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, the SNAPS report, yeah, I think we have a copy of that one. But T's going to they'll have a copy of it, but I doubt that they really look at it as far as that goes, because they are going to look at our data. It's the same data that the chamber would have looked at, but again, they're breaking that down. They're taking that total number, because it's our audited numbers. We're not changing those numbers, but we're breaking it down per unit accurately as much as we can. It'll all be there. And then the data that's going to come out of that we give to T, we can maybe present that maybe at the next utility meeting.
Tyler?
To address one of the things, just to kind of clear something up, Mr. Zirkle, the city council, the way that we're set up, this body of 10 does not have the ability to enter into a contract with anyone. We can't have a liaison to the council. We cannot hire a separate attorney. We cannot enter into any kind of agreement. We're not allowed to have those kind of relationships. What ends up happening is that we have to go through the ones with the city, correct?
Well, the functions that you're speaking of are primarily, I think, properly aligned with executive activities. The council is primarily addressing things such as funding, approving a proposed contract, not actually negotiating a contract. So there's a clear fundamental difference. The executive departments cannot approve budgets. They can't adopt budgets, they can't do contracts past a certain amount, and so on and so on. So there's a balance, but the council really is not, would not be proper to for example, try to negotiate contracts or things of this nature.
Right, but to the point of when he mentioned us having a liaison with some of these other groups or some of these other entities, the council itself cannot do that. Not the way that we're set up.
That's not accurate, Chris. The city council in its legislative function can hire one Tim Griffins or three Tim Griffins, or one Jeanettes or two. And we're allowed to do what we want to do to analyze what is before us, but I think we're getting off track here. I don't think that's a major point of contention.
I'm just addressing something that was suggested, that, that this has been considered before when we talked about this, the council in another format, 5-6 years ago, we talked about hiring an attorney to write draft legislation for us.
That's a different issue. That's covered in the city code, that the council will not have its own attorney. That's specifically addressed in the city code, but it doesn't go beyond city attorney, Chris.
Okay, Alderman Hanauer?
Well, I hate to say this, but Alderman McMenamin, I agree with you on this. I think that we should be able to, we should see somebody's intervening here. We should be able to hire a consultant if, I mean, I'm not going to lie. The CWLP stuff is crazy. How difficult it is. But if we felt the need, we should be able to hire a consultant to come on board and work with us on certain aspects of it to make sure that we're kept up to date. Whether that's needed, I at this point I don't know, but
can't do it.
I agree. I think that we should be able to do that, but like hiring other attorneys and stuff like that, that's a whole different story.
Alderman Turner.
At this juncture, I don't know that the city council would necessarily need to hire a liaison to work on this project, because that's why we have CWLP staff. Are we saying that we don't trust them to give us accurate information? It seems to me that's why we have CWLP staff, to act in that role. And I trust them to give us, accurate information. I don't know why they would not. And so I just think that that's something that's not necessary at this juncture.
Next.
Mr. Chair, can we, not on what Alderman Turner was talking about, but on the points that we've been discussing about as far as analyzing the other reports that have come out in the past, the two Synapse reports, and there was a Moody's report having to do with analyzing the efficiency of generation plants around the country. When the representatives from the Energy Authority were here in person, we specifically addressed the question of whether they would look at the other reports that have been circulated. And at the conclusion of that meeting, I gave the representative of the Energy Authority a list of the early reports that had attempted to analyze the efficiency and viability of our 4th-generation plants. So I think there's an expectation that the Energy Authority, although not guided by those reports, will at least refer to those reports and be in a position to respond to public participation questions that might reference those early reports when the Energy Authority provides its options and its conclusions regarding the 4 power plants. So I think it would be healthy for the Energy Authority to be aware that we've got some very well informed members of the public that did study those earlier reports, the 2 by Synapse and the 1 by Moody's and so forth, and that they may be very much a possibility that questions during the public participation phase later on at the conclusion will cause those reports to be in the discussion. So I think it'd be healthy for the Energy Authority to be aware of that.
Alderman, my only concern with that is we're trying to influence their analysis. We have to let them do their work, even though I do think that there should be some type of comparison eventually, but to the point where they're using that to come up with their data for us is what I'm worried about. I want to make sure we get a clean report. Like Alderman Hanauer said, it takes 6 months or it takes a year. We want the most accurate information we can get so we can get the best thing for what our ratepayers are needing to pay. So that's my only criticism.
But I think that one of the things that Alderman McMiniman said is valid. If the reports could be made available so that if someone in their public comment references one of those reports, it should be available for them to look at. But I agree with you that it should not be a driving force behind what the end game that they're trying to reach.
Because we all know that there are special interests everywhere. And I'm not saying anything about the Sierra Club. They have a great mission. They do a great job. The Chamber of Commerce has their reasons why they did it. And so we take that all into consideration. But what the ultimate comes down to is that we got to make a tough decision when we get this report back, when they bring recommendations to us. We can compare them to whatever we want to compare them to, but we got to do what's right for the ratepayers. And that's the bottom line. So please.
Thanks. I'm Don Hanrahan. You probably know what question I'm going to bring up. The focus is on the power plants, but water is a key issue. Water, as Alderman Tylen pointed out, is key to operating the coal plants. So 7.7 to 8 million gallons of water a day is consumed by units 31, 32, and 33. Total treated water use on average is 21 million gallons of water a day. That includes 3 for Unit 4 because it uses treated water, not raw water. So 27.5% of water being used is used by 31, 32, 33. Maybe not every day, but that's a lot of water. Right now, you're spending millions to study again Hunter Lake, Lake 2, whatever we're going to call it. It's been shot down 3 different times because of a failure to demonstrate need, or if there was a need, that it's the least expensive and least environmentally destructive alternative. Now we're studying it again on the theory that once every 100 years there's going to be a drought so bad it's going to shut down the power plants, and once every 100 years we won't have enough water. The shortfall estimated at 10 or 11 million gallons of water a day, which of course we have always contended is not the case. Leave that alone for a minute. We're now talking about taking away 27.5% of the water being used in this city by closing down old power plants that are no longer either economically viable or environmentally viable. And if we close them down, what is the need for a second lake? Why are we spending what's going to amount to another $150 million to build something we don't need, we won't ever need? My question is, why is this not tabled until the IRP is finished? The gentleman from Ward 9 is right. People can take incremental price increases, but they can't deal with big increases in their bills. Hunter Lake will be an immense increase in their bills. Keeping these plants open and spending the tens of millions of dollars that came out in the Burns-McDonnell study, which is needed to make them compliant, is going to result in large increases in electric rates. This is not stuff people can handle. And so when you're considering the integrated resource plan, consider how can you save money? We need $150 million to dredge Lake Springfield to restore its capacity. to what it was. 20% of it's gone because we've let it fill up with mud, because the whole theory of managing Lake Springfield from the beginning has been don't defer the maintenance, don't do anything. Now we've got 80 years of mud. It needs to be cleaned out. Money needs to be spent on that. We've got all these things coming up. And if you no longer need 27.5% of your water to run power plants, we don't need another lake. We can save that money and use it for what's needed. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would just like to comment to that, because all these issues are somewhat interrelated, but not only has our water usage been flat to declining, but now we're receiving reports that our population is flat to declining. So that's another impact on water usage, and so all that goes into the mix. So I appreciate, Mr. Hanran, you relating the coal-fired plants issue to the water demand issue.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please state your name, Council.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Vice Chairman, my name is Ernie Nielsen. I live at 1322 South Noble Avenue, and I apologize for not knowing exactly how to sign up to speak today. I will submit comments and questions. And for tonight, I just have two brief questions. One is, I looked on the website and I couldn't find any load curves or the usage by hour, for example, on peak day. Is there such data that's available to the public, and I should just contact the utility for it? Okay. The second question point is one that I heard uttered here a couple weeks ago about labor and the potential impact that closing down 1, 2, and 3 may have on labor. I also understood that there is a study or an audit that is being conducted, and I'm hoping that this audit that is being conducted is going to help you and help inform you to understand what it needs to make a plan to mitigate any impacts that may be imposed on labor if you do decide to remove 1, 2, and 3 from your portfolio. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just a clarification, Mr. Chair, what's the audit that's being referred to there on the labor?
I think the mayor's looking at the impact of the labor force at the utility if we close the plants down. I can't tell you exactly what the audit is, but that's, am I right about that, Corporation Counsel?
I'm not familiar with with that aspect of it being looked at, other than just what the impact may be about closing certain of the units and that sort of thing. Just on a manning point of view?
Yes, I believe it's a manning.
Yeah.
It was the, I believe it's the audit group company that we brought in. They're doing some work out at CWLP, check on.
No, I think they he was just kind of looking at it, a general concept of maybe, I don't know how far this goes, but I don't think it was more than utility too, actually. I think it was across basically just doing looking at job audits and seeing what areas could be done maybe more efficiently, that kind of thing. So I'm not for sure where that process is. We haven't really had much discussion on it.
And I would say the audit firm that was chosen has done, I think, 300 or 400 utilities. Therefore, that was viewed as basically a positive.
Yes.
But it was not. That's not different than just a normal audit they're doing. But
and I think it's a different part of their firm that does that portion of the work.
James, state your name for the committee.
Thank you. James Johnson, Ward 2, Environmental Chair for state and local. And there's a lot I want to touch on. I've read the Moody's report, and if you haven't read it, I suggest you read it, skim through it. And I would love to see the other reports too. Michael did an awesome job on his presentation. And with that, let me say thank you. And thank you to the mayor and the council for having these meetings, because we have asked for them and we do want them. And I'm going to help you, Mr. Donovan, on what you could say to your constituents and everybody else in the community about what we really need. Because the NAACP environmental nationally is pushing for more clean air. We're pushing to get rid of coal industries because, one, it's affecting our health. And that's the main reason why I will be making a big fuss or standing up and speaking, because like the gentleman said back there and somebody else said, you know, they want their kids and their grandkids to stick around. But I'm going to go a step further than that. I want their kids and their grandkids to be able to breathe good air and drink good water. And I'm concerned about our health issues. Nobody's talking about that with coal power plants, but that is a big issue. We have major problems with this coal power plant. Now, them coal companies, they're making tons of money. But any of that money floating back into my community or in our city, I'm going to say not. So I'm not in favor of it.
James, real quick, I don't know how many coal miners out of the mine up, the Arch mine. There's a lot of them that live in Springfield, so yeah, that does have an economic impact.
Okay.
Just let you know.
All right.
Because I happen to know a couple of them that.
I'll give you that.
There are, we had, not to cut you off, but we had this discussion during the coal contract discussions, and there are some that live in Springfield, but the percentage is very low. There are some that live in Sangamon County, but not necessarily in Springfield. Just to.
Thank you. And I agree with that, but I understand what you're saying.
No,
but the point is, no matter if they work here or not, coal is affecting our communities, our health, and nobody seems to be addressing that. We have an ash pond over there near our water that leaks. Nobody is addressing that. Our lake needs dredge because, one, everything in the bottom, and I'm going to go on a limb and say that ash pond. So we need to address issues like that. And I've asked Doug years ago for how much are we spending on repairing our units. Now, I don't know if the city council has got an answer on that, but there's an outage every year, granted. But how many outages have any of those units have in 1 year, and how much are we spending? I sat at some of these city council meetings, and I look at these numbers for repairs. Man, that's some ridiculous numbers. And our community don't know about it because don't nobody share that information. How much are we spending a year on repairs? So do we need to move forward from that? Yes. Is the industry moving? And Mr. Donnelly, this is what you can share. Our industry is moving to solar, wind. For you ones who don't know, there's wind farms going up as we speak. Just drive northeast of here, and it's going to continue. And there's a bunch going up. And there's solar panels already in our downtown area on rooftops. So yeah, our goal should be to lower our rates for everyone who lives in our community. Our goal should be to care about the water we drink and the air that we breathe. So I will be pushing for solar and wind. And that act that they talked about that's coming, yeah, that is going to expedite what I'm talking about. And that's going to bring jobs. And hopefully it's jobs to people in our community. And Mr. Hanauer, you said something about that number 4, paying that off. We'll never pay that off. Not in your lifetime, not in my lifetime. Share with your constituents and the community how much we still owe on that. And I promise you, we won't. pay it off in a lifetime. That's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Anyone else?
On top of that, I'm
What's your name,
concerned,
please?
Angel Sides. I'm concerned about global warming. James Hansen of the NASA Goddard Institute was quoted in the New York Times that if we don't keep 80% of fossil fuels in the ground, it'll be game over for our planet. So we have to look at the environment. And whoever spoke just then, he's right. The ABT issued a study commissioned by the Clean Air Task Force, a nonprofit research and advocacy organization, and found in 2011 the Dahlman plant is responsible for 5 deaths a year, 7 heart attacks, 3 hospital admissions, and 79 asthma attacks, and 5 ER asthma visits. So it is affecting our community's health. We have studies that have linked coal pollution to autism as well. So on the news and elsewhere, you hear of a lot of young people and a lot of communities suing the coal industry, and they're suing the oil industry for reparations. And this is the kind of thing. Who do we send our medical bills to? I'd like to send my medical bills for my asthma, half of them to the CWLP and half of them to the city of Springfield, because that's what's going to happen. That's what's down the line. If we don't make a sharp turn towards alternative energy, we're going to have to add reparations and health costs to those graphs and everything that everyone's concerned about, if you're so concerned about money and paying things off. But on the other hand, solar roads can give a city 3 times the electricity that it needs. And that could be something we could sell to other communities, not water, but electricity to help pay off Unit 4. If we would move to solar roads, I think it could be offset by the public works budget, and roads that are in need of repair or replaced could be replaced by solar roads. That is something I would like to see the numbers crunched on that, and a little more concern for the environment and our health. And I don't know if that's something that we could look into and really crunch the numbers on that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Davis?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ralph.
I got a question for CWLP. Everybody's talking about the pollution. Are we not meeting the standards that EPA has set forth on our, that's steam coming out, right? Or how are we doing on that? I mean, we have to report anything that's above, right? How's all that work? I want to make sure that the citizens know that we're in compliance and.
Yes, we do meet the standards that the government has set for regulation of the power plants.
Right.
Yes, so that goes to the air emissions for the utility, and then our drinking water is, heard some comments there. We produce a water quality report every year. Our water is of the highest quality. There's no issues with our drinking water whatsoever. So.
In our current wind contracts that we've had, what have we spent? What's it cost our ratepayers since they came in?
I think by the time they're all said and done, they're going to be about 120 million.
120
costs.
120 million.
In addition to what we buy it for, right?
Yeah, right. That's basically a cost that's passed on
cost
to our customers through the fuel adjustment. Yes. So we're all have been responsible for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, on the question of paying off Dahlman 4, we're paying it off at the rate of roughly, is it $34 million a year? There used to be a chart in your presentation that showed that. Yeah. I think the total payoff occurs in 2040 or thereabouts, I think.
What was the number? 2032.
2032, okay, all right.
Yeah, there is a rate. It's going to get paid off.
I plan on being alive in 2032.
So do I, hopefully.
Right?
Now, Doug, for years, we actually exceeded the EPA regulations, and that's where we were actually selling those credits before the Obama administration canceled that practice. We were actually generating environmental credits because we were above and beyond.
For SO2 and NOx, yes, we were. And
So we were, for years, CWLP has been leading the industry in how much we had for environmental practices above and beyond what was necessary.
Right. And you look at, Salem County as a whole, I mean, we're definitely not in the same picture as a lot of the other metropolitan areas where they're actually, those whole areas are out of attainment, or we're not.
Mr. Davis, please.
One other thing.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Tylen. Alderman Tylen, do you want to say something?
One other thing, and we can't comment on the coal on the coal ash ponds because
we're in the middle of a lawsuit.
In the middle of a lawsuit, isn't that correct, Mr. Zirkle?
Well, there's pending litigation, so we should not be discussing the specifics.
Just wanted people to know why we're not addressing it. So,
Mr. Davis.
I'm Don Davis, former resident of Springfield, still have family here. Two things. Your planners apparently did not pay attention to the National Energy Conservation Act of 1994, which would have predicted the curve of demand to peak and go the opposite way. Some years later, it shouldn't have been a surprise. It also affects water demand because efficiency is baked into everything. Water that is treated and pumped is an energy product. So you have to keep in consideration that as the demand for everything peaks and goes down, you're going to end up with stranded assets and no way to pay for them unless you decouple the sale of water and electricity from your long-term debt. And there are some states that apparently are doing that now, that their commerce commissions have changed the economic game plan, and you need to look into it. You haven't grown at all. You're losing population. Your electricity sales have peaked and falling. Your water sales are peaked and falling. It's not going to change unless you get a huge influx of global warming refugees coming from the coast. Of course, that could happen, I suppose. But I'm just saying, as you need to look into that, and you need to have your experts here look into that. You may be wanting to lobby the Illinois Commerce Commission about a new way to structure electric and water rates. So you decouple sales from getting your debt serviced. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to comment on Mr. Davis. I think he raises a good point about the decision to build the power plant. It was not just merely a decision based on our energy experts and planners at the time. We had a politician running city as the general manager of CWLP, Mr. Todd Renfro, in combination with a mayor that was highly, I think he had plans that didn't always mix with good, sound, wise financial planning and energy planning. And I think we also have to acknowledge the very heavy and stiff contributions from our construction trades unions pushing the city in certain directions. Just like that happened 10 years ago with our power plant, I think we're seeing some of the same dynamics with the second lake. All the aldermen here know that they receive heavy contributions from the laborers, from the operating engineers, and they would like to see infrastructure projects, which we understand. And the Lake 2 is a very expensive infrastructure project, but we have other infrastructure needs such as our sewer projects and so forth. So I think, Mr. Davis, you raise a good point that some of this leveling off of energy consumption was forecast, but we went in another direction with our building of Dolman 4, which was also, a plan to pay down our pension debt because we thought we'd be able to sell on the open market. But I just want to talk about, we got to deal with the fact that we've got financial interests and special interests coming to bear on the city council. Now, let's just talk about the coal mine. I think it's inexcusable for aldermen. From my point of view, it's legal. But I think it's a really severe mistake for aldermen to take campaign contributions from the coal mine when we're got that issue to deal with down the road, or to take contributions that have a direct impact on what course of on the special interests that want the city council to go in a certain direction. So that has to be part of the discussion too.
What about the Sierra Club?
Yeah.
You're
part of the Sierra Club, Joe. How's that any different?
I have never taken a contribution from the Sierra Club, and I'm not a member of the Sierra Club.
That's enough. That's enough. You want to say anything else?
My wife is a member of the Sierra Club, but I am not.
No, that's enough.
And she, and so you're upset because you take a $500 contribution to the coal
you're
mine.
out of order.
I may be out of order, but he just made a charge.
I never took a $500. Listen, if there's anything I've done wrong, if I've done anything wrong, Joe, then turn me in. But I followed everything based on the
I'm sorry
campaign
you got so
laws.
upset.
Because I'm tired of you questioning everybody's integrity.
I'm talking about the fact that lots of money moves around.
Out of line. Let's go.
What about Hobby taking 6 digits?
Shut up
So,
over there.
let's talk about
out of here.
just to kind of wrap things up, at least for the utilities perspective on the IRP, we understand there's frustration, there's a lot of things that have past choices that have been made and maybe choosing the wrong direction, but I think we're headed down the right path. And I think that's what we need to focus on. Stop looking at what happens in the past and looking at our future, because I think we can make some really good decisions on how we want to, the city of Springfield to look going forward. So hopefully everybody will join with that spirit and let's make a good product here for this study. So,
thank you, Derek.
Okay.
And vote Redpath out of Dawkins.
Yeah, do your best.
Hey, Mr. Chair.
That's rude.
Go.
Very rude.
Is there?
Real quick, are we under?
He's calling security.
Are we under new business by chance?
Yes, go ahead.
Doug, could I have you discuss? Last night we had power outages on the west side, and there's been some questions raised as to our response and that we didn't respond people because of overtime and things. I just wanted to make sure that got addressed at this so everybody understands what happened.
Sure. As for what we do for our linemen that are called out, we let them, we're going to have them call out. We're not restricting overtime whatsoever, but when there's inclement weather, it was a very bad storm that continued for hours, and I think you probably were probably awake at some point last night. And the lightning is a danger to those linemen. The trees at some of the major areas where we had the major, was it 1,500 abouts, customers out of power. There was a major circuit there that's in a heavily wooded area, and was that on cue to be done later this summer?
Correct. It was planned to be trimmed later this summer, about a 5-mile stretch of smart grid that we needed to get done. And that's what took so long, really, was trying to patrol that entire length to see where the issue was, especially at night in the middle of a storm. It's extremely difficult to find it when you get 3 inches of rain and it just kind of hangs on those trees, and then they sink down into the lines. If a tree breaks and falls, it's easy to find a tree. But when they just hang down the lines, that's what makes it difficult, especially when it's stripped out, like the circuit was stripped out, and then it's not burning that line. A lot of times, if the circuit's not out, you can see where it's burning that tree, and we can find that as we're walking those lines or some driving those lines. It just took a long time. But we did nothing, and we've done nothing to not bring people out to restore power.
It wasn't due to your concern about overtime. There was a big rumor around that and I think Alderwoman DeCenso got some calls too about it, and some of us got calls that.
I wish I knew where that originated.
I don't know either.
But that's not the case. Whoever started that's not true.
I mean, my ex-husband, my former husband, was a lineman for the city, and he was called out in lightning and thunder and ice and sleet and snow and blizzards and sub-zero weather all the time. So, when a friend of mine who's a single mom has $3,000 worth of damage done to her basement in a few hours because her sump pump's off and there's no one that's coming out between 1:30 and she's not restored till about 9 a.m.
Yeah, but that had nothing to do with not wanting to pay overtime. That just had to do with trying to resolve the issue.
Okay.
And I definitely understand the compassion with that. I've had my basement flood twice for the lack of power.
Well, and I appreciate it again, and to the crews that were out in dealing with that, I appreciate the work that they did.
They did a great job, actually.
So, thank you.
Any other unfinished business?
Yeah, I'd like to just add to my comments. I think this issue of
Alderman, before you start, please don't get personal. You can say whatever you want. Please don't get personal.
Okay, I won't make it personal. There's one alderman among us that's received over $35,000 from the laborers.
What's that got to do with the committee? That's ridiculous.
So I think we all have to be aware of that.
So please cut it off.
And I think it's a mistake to take that kind of money from a single source.
Is there an executive session?
I can follow the money. That sounds like it has something to do.
Did we get security yet?
There's no
Bonnie, would you please go find security and remove this lady, please?
They're on the way.
They're on their way? Good.
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
Hold up.
Just before we adjourn, I just want to say that I want to thank Amber and Julia for getting the information out about the committee as widely spread as you did. I think that really helped, and it really speaks to the chair and my promise to everyone that we would put that information out. It was actually out for about a month before the meeting, and putting the agenda out. So, and we will continue to do that. And I will say that if anyone has anything, again, that they would like to have added to the agenda, if you could just either email me or Alderman Redpath or Council Coordinator Griffin, we'd be happy to put that on the agenda. We want these meetings to be not just us regurgitating information. We want it to be beneficial to everybody. So please, if you have things that you want on the agenda, let us know, and we will continue to put information out, a month in advance like we did this time.
And the whole point of this was to inform everyone, and we met with the Sierra Club, and we came up with, we listened to their concerns. So I hope this was informative to you, and sorry about the personal crap that went on here, but thank you for your input, and hopefully we're moving forward in the right direction, and we're trying to make it as transparent as we possibly can for everyone. So with that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Hey, she's going to